Chapter 3. It was a hot and muggy night in Detroit. The moisture poured off Lake St. Clair, and mixing with the heat from the plains to the southwest, it created an almost unbearable kind of steam bath. Detectives Ed Benson and Jim Ryan cruised slowly down 51st Street, checking out the old, dilapidated storefronts and iron-gated liquor stores.
"We've been looking for this dude for 3 days,
Ryan said to his black partner. Benson nodded, pulled out a cigarette, and peered across the steering wheel at a darkly shrouded storefront. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure crouching in the shadows, but on a second look, he realized it was his eyes playing games with him.
"Yeah, Ryan,"
Benson replied.
"it's been a ass assignment. One lousy junkie terrorizing the whole damn South Side, and we gotta find him."
3 long nights of prowling the neighborhood in their unmarked car, searching through every known hangout in town, had provided the 2 detectives with nothing more than strained nerves. The change in routine, the drabness of their search, had been a complete reversal of what the 2 detectives had been used to in the past. 11 months had passed since the Holocaust at Kenyatta's ranch, a virtual slaughter that had culminated in a mass of dead black men and 3 white police officers losing their lives. In the entire history of the Detroit Police Department, there had never been anything like it. It had come to be referred to as the Farm Country Massacre, quote-unquote, by the press and the local citizens. That had been one of the closest chances Benson and Ryan had ever come to the fabled Kenyatta. The elusive leader of blacks from the ghetto had somehow escaped, hijacked a plane, and crash-landed in the vast desert outside Las Vegas. From that moment on, he had virtually disappeared off the face of the earth. But then information started filtering in. Information that gave good reason to believe Kenyatta and the remains of his vengeful band had made it to Los Angeles. And Benson and Ryan, who had been on his tail virtually from the beginning, a beginning that had included 2 small-time killers named Billy and Jackie, and even the murderous drug pusher Kingfisher, were chosen to track him down. Who else, their captain had reasoned, knew more about the elusive Kenyatta than Benson and Ryan? And so they agreed to assist the FBI and the LAPD. Kenyatta, Betty, Eddie B., Jug, Jeannie, and the dying Red were headed for Watts in 2 separate cars when they had to stop for gas. A police cruiser pulled into the station, and Red, crazed in his near-death state, jumped from the car and started shooting. Benson and Ryan were already headed to the area, which in the meantime had turned into a hellish inferno of death when a stray bullet had struck a gas pump. In the last-minute dash for life, Kenyatta drove his car through the service area of the station and through to the other side just as Benson's and Ryan's car rounded the corner. Too late, the black and white detective team realized that they had missed their best chance to nab the fabled Kenyatta. Then they were requested to return home. Benson and Ryan had pleaded with their captain for an assignment to track Kenyatta through the southwest and west, but the request had been denied. The 2 men were sent back onto regular duty dealing with the pimps, the junkies, and the pushers. It seemed as though the man who had become an obsession to both detectives would never again phase their lives. Now Benson and Ryan drove through the empty streets of Detroit In another 2 hours, the sun would rise, and stifling heat would begin to curse the ghetto. The two detectives would leave their shift, grab a quick, greasy breakfast, and fall into bed for another attempt at 8 hours of sleep. Benson listened to the police radio as he smoked a cigarette. He reached for the phone when he heard his call letters and picked it up.
Benson here,
he said.
The captain asks you to report to headquarters immediately.
The girl on the other end said matter-of-factly.
Yeah, be right in.
Benson replaced the phone and looked at his partner.
Wonder what the old bastard wants now.
Probably got us a 15-year-old junkie who's turning in his brother as a pusher.
There was no mistaking the bitterness in Ryan's voice. The police building was dark and depressing. The old brick structure had been standing for more than 50 years. The joke around the headquarters was that when the building celebrated its 50th year, they would condemn it. That never happened. The city was running low on funds because of the automobile shutdowns. Even Tiger Stadium, where the Lions and Tigers played their games, had not been renovated, and that would normally take first priority. Captain Frank Turner waited inside his small, cluttered office for the two detectives. The small, rotund senior officer clenched a cigar tightly between his teeth. He held 2 manila folders containing sheets that had come over the wire service. His pudgy face was wrinkled into a position of serious thought when detectives Benson and Ryan entered his office.
Have a seat, gentlemen,
Turner growled behind a thick cigar. Benson looked quickly at Ryan and knew that his partner was thinking the same thing. A chewing yowl from Turner normally began with the old gruffy captain having the men remain standing. Serious business was conducted from the civil position of sitting in chairs. At least, thought Benson, the old bastard has something worthwhile instead of the usual complaints.
How you boys been?
Turner began, shuffling the folders on the desk in front of him.
Fine, Captain,
Benson replied, wanting really to describe the boredom and uselessness that their job had come to represent, but thinking better of it.
That's good,
Turner said blankly. Then the small captain stood up behind his desk and spread the folders out on the table. He leaned forward and looked at both men.
Gentlemen,
Turner began,
we've just gotten a wire service report from Los Angeles. At approximately midnight last night, an office of the OEO was attacked and burned to the ground by members of a teenage gang known as the Black Maria. One man named Elliot Stone somehow escaped and is now at County General. He was the head of the office.
Turner paused a moment, then bent down as if to reread the print on the reports. He looked up again at the two waiting detectives.
2 other men died at that fire. Their bodies burned beyond recognition. But the thief remained, and the LA police were able to get a print. They have been identified as Jimmy Adams and Frank Robinson. Ring a bell?
Benson could feel the tension rise in the room. His partner leaned forward in his chair and let out a slow, impressive whistle.
Well?
Turner asked.
Kenyatta,
Benson answered simply.
Right. Both men, we believe, were in the massacre out at the farm. Now they've turned up at the OEO in Los Angeles.
Turner had not been on the force at the time of the Kenyatta massacre, but had heard every variation of the story that existed. The hatred for the black leader that existed in Detroit was beyond anything that Turner had ever seen. He had been in New York when Malcolm X was alive and running meetings at the Garden, but the feelings were nothing like what existed within the Detroit Police Department. It would be a feather in the cap of the longtime policeman if he could pay back the black man for the deaths within the department that he had caused. Benson leaned back in his chair and watched the captain closely. He could see the anxiety and the excitement that he was feeling, but Benson was a black cop, a contradiction within itself, and he had felt the pain and horror during the massacre when the tanks had been brought in. Those were his people, a bloodline that went deep into the darkest past of Africa, who were being shot and killed that day by a virtual army of policemen.
You want Kenyatta?
Benson asked simply.
Yes, I do,
Turner replied, but his voice slightly shocked with anticipation. Already within the little captain's mind, he could see the headlines, the adulation of the white community, and the respect that he would garner from the rest of the department. Jim Ryan stood up and walked to Turner's desk.
Captain, since that day, I've wanted nothing more than to nail that son of a bitch. I'm sure everyone in this damn building feels exactly the same way.
Turner smiled and extended his hand to Ryan, but out of the corner of his eye, he was looking at Benson, who remained seated.
Thank you, Ryan. There's still a debt to be paid, and I think you're the man to collect.
Benson could not stop himself. The anger and the bitterness that had been building up inside like a volcano finally erupted.
Wait a second,
Benson yelled, leaping from his chair.
Those people paid enough already. They paid with their lives. Women, children, and 10 times the number of men killed on the force. They paid when we brought in those god tanks and bazookas as if we were fighting some foreign enemy.
Ryan and Turner still clutched hands, their faces told of their shock at Benson's outburst. Turner was afraid, but Ryan understood very well his partner's feelings. At that moment, he hated himself for having jumped to Turner like he had.
Detective Benson,
Turner said, his voice uneven.
Those people out there that day were the enemy. We weren't dealing with a Martin Luther King or even a Malcolm X out there. We were dealing with a madman and his army of...
Turner stopped himself quickly.
Negroes, Benson, who were trying to take over the damn city.
Benson breathed deeply. There was nothing more he could say. Right now, his words could only be delivered through his fists, which rested clenched and threateningly next to his body.
Listen,
Ryan began in a soothing voice.
We all know how you felt about what happened out there that day. A lot of other people felt the same way, but you know better than most people just how Kenyatta works. It wasn't a racial thing, man. It was a police action.
Now you listen, my man, Benson began coldly.
We know of 10, maybe 15 damn super patriot white groups hanging around the outskirts of this motherfucking city with enough of an arsenal to blow up the fucking town and the lake, too. The Minutemen, Sons of the Pioneers, freedom fighters.
But, Turner interrupted,
they're patriots, Benson. Men who fear the enemy and have attempted to prepare themselves for our protection. They don't want to overthrow the country. They want to save it.
They're still illegal, Captain, but we never go after them, do we? Benson flinched, felt the adrenaline shoot through him, and his body tense. He had gone too far, and yet he had not gone far enough. Turner glared at Benson, then turned his back. He could see the rage in the large black man's body, and he feared it. The cords of Benson's neck were throbbing. His jaw muscles were tightened. The little white captain had seen enough of them when they were angry to know when to get out of the way.
Now listen,
Turner began quietly, sitting behind his desk for the first time.
We're civilized men dealing with a professional problem here. Benson, you've brought up some good points, but they're irrelevant to the case at hand.
Benson saw the man creeping steadily into the womb of his position, retreating from him behind his gold badge.
"All right, Captain,"
Benson said.
"I am a professional, and you are my immediate supervisor."
The bitterness in his voice was not missed by Ryan.
Captain,
Ryan began in earnest.
we want this assignment. My partner feels strongly about it. He maybe feels too strongly.
Benson looked at Ryan and saw the man doing everything in his power to pull him out. Ryan was right. Benson was a professional, a black man who many years before had given up his right to deal with the problem of race outside the law. It was his commitment and no one else's. At that time, Benson had believed in the system, had seen or thought he saw the routes through which he could make a difference. He knew that if those routes were closed to him, then all he had to do was to hand in his badge and make that journey to the Twilight Arena on the fringe. It was there that some of his brothers believed that out of the anarchy and chaos would come order and equality. But Benson, detective with the Detroit Police Department and black man, did not think so.
Okay,
Turner began quietly.
enough of this discussion. Benson, I know how you feel and why, but let's let that pass. Right now, we have more important things to discuss.
Benson looked at Ryan, then sat down in his chair. Turner waited until both men were seated before talking.
You'll grab the first plane out of here for Los Angeles. A Los Angeles detective in charge of narcotics with the General Watts area will meet you both at the airport. His name is Julius Stein, a good man.
Turner hesitated. He was going to add the phrase,
Even though he's a
but Benson's dark, brooding face had stopped him.
You should
He continued after clearing his throat.
have the complete cooperation of the LAPD. What about this guy Stone?
Ryan asked, leaning forward again with that intense interest he always displayed at such meetings.
Stone's at county, as I told you. According to our reports, he's been hit badly in the stomach with a shotgun, and he's also suffering from first-degree burns on his legs. The doctors are probably operating right now.
Benson had calmed down enough to begin using his professional mind once again. He sifted through his memory, sorted out names, running down the categories of black men whom he had reason to be familiar with. The name Elliot Stone finally came to the forefront.
"Elliot Stone,
He said.
wasn't he the running back at USC?"
Turner smiled.
That's right. Damn, he was a good boy. Would have broken OJ's record, except for that injury. Shit, what a fucking runner.
Benson smiled. It was always startling to him how white men could be so fond as long as they were carrying a football, shooting a basket, or whacking a home run. Take them off the playing field, and suddenly they're threats to society.
Wonder what he was doing there.
Ryan mused.
"He was pretty active.
Benson replied.
Even when he was carrying the football, NAACP worked a while for McGovern, an involved dude. It isn't surprising he was made head of that office so soon. The kid was bright.
Well,
Turner interjected.
that should make it all the more easy for you guys to get something out of him. If he's as bright as you say and knows anything about Kenyatta, he should be more than willing to help.
Benson was about to tell Turner that somehow that line of reasoning did not jive. A lot of bright young black men had gone Kenyatta's way because they were able to see what was really coming down, and that was where a man like Kenyatta pulled his strength. Instead, Benson mumbled something like,
I sure do hope so, Captain.
Turner nodded, then stood up and waddled around to the front of his desk. He passed Ryan and greeted Benson with an outstretched hand.
Benson?
He began, pumping the black detective's hand too vigorously.
If there's any man in this department who has the talent to get something done out there, it's you.
Thank you, sir, Benson said, playing the little charade through to the end. All he wanted now was to get out, get on that plane with Ryan, and begin using his skills to find out what was going down in Los Angeles. After shaking Ryan's hand, Captain Turner gave each man a copy of the report and then told them to pick up the files on Kenyatta downstairs. He led the two men to the door and held it open for them.
I want a report filed out of L.A. every day. Set it up as soon as you arrive and get to that damn hospital quick.
Turner watched the two detectives walk down the hallway, then disappear around the corner. He closed the door to his office and sighed. He could feel his high blood pressure rising. Attempting to calm himself, he took a few deep breaths and exhaled quickly. His head was reeling from the confrontation with Benson. If the man hadn't been a f***ing he said to himself,
I would have had his ass back on the streets.
But Captain Turner wanted Kenyatta very badly, and he knew that. By using a black detective, his chances were that much greater. Turner had always been of the opinion that those people, quote-unquote, thought differently than white folks. Only a could hope to understand another. Yes, thought Turner, now smiling to himself. It would take a like Benson to nail a like Kenyatta. Satisfied with his decision, Captain Frank Turner smuggled into his leather-upholstered chair and leaned back. He would be off duty in another hour, and then he would be able to go home and tell his wife his plans. He vowed to himself to keep the news quiet at Esposito's, his favorite drinking hole. But deep down, inside, he knew that after a couple of rounds, he would be telling all the boys about his active involvement with the man known as Kenyatta. Yes, thought Turner. Tonight, I'll have martinis. A man in my position has got to learn to relax to get the pressures of so mammoth a responsibility off his shoulders. Frank Turner had waited a long time for an opportunity like this, and now that it had arrived, he was pleased with himself and his feeling of importance. It was all perfect, except for one thing. If only that detective hadn't been so f***ing uppity. But Turner decided he would take care of Benson later.